Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm going to try to share about 20 years of research in an hour. So let's see how that works. I may not be able to see everybody at all times because of the way the Zoom is. I'll try and go back and forth so that I can see it. But if you have a question, please just post it in chat and I'll see it and I'll try to answer it. Or if there's a pause in the discussion, just jump in and ask the question out loud. Love talking with everybody. It's usually my preference, actually. So thank you for coming today. So final conversations are every conversation that people have with their loved one who is dying. So this research is about the family members. It's about the survivors who have to go on living after the loved one has died. And final conversations occur from the moment there is a terminal diagnosis. And so both the terminally ill person and the family member, they are aware that their days are numbered, that they're going to die of a terminal illness. They also occur when people become quite elderly. For instance, my father just died at 91 this past July. And we had many conversations over the years that I consider as final conversations, because as he grew older, I knew, and he had dementia, I knew that there'd be less and less opportunity. So let me first introduce what the 6 themes are, and then I'm going to share with you some things that I have discovered about final conversations and coping and personal growth and challenges, and even some advice from children about their perspective on final conversations. So again, if you have any questions, please ask them. So there are 6 final conversation themes. And the first one is love. Love comes in both verbal and nonverbal ways. So it can be as simple as I love you for the first time or for the millionth time. And it can be holding hands or a kiss on the cheek or whatever the message is of how you would communicate love to your loved one is, and vice versa. So these things are from, originally were discovered from retrospective interviews where I've interviewed over 80 adults. I've also interviewed over 65 children, and I've also surveyed over 600 individuals about their final conversations. And that was through, that part was through a quantitative and qualitative open-ended surveys, 2 or 3 surveys at this point. So, and what's interesting about the quantitative surveys is that they confirmed all this qualitative research that I first began with. So love, thank God, it was number 1. It was the most often memorable message that people would come back to and would tell me how important they were. The second one is identity. In fact, I'm going to go through each one because I think I have a slide for each of them. The third one is identity, by the way, is messages that tell us about who we are from our loved ones. Spiritual or religious messages highlight, sometimes they're very straightforward, saying I'll meet you at Heaven's Gate, or saying the Our Father together, or a spiritual experience, feeling the energy of your loved one as they pass over. Or I've also had individuals who were terminally ill tell their loved ones about spiritual experiences they were having, seeing their past. Like my dad started talking about my mom toward the end of his life, and he said that she was visiting him, and that he also was seeing all these other people he knew, and was asking my twin sister who was in the room at the time if she could see them, and she couldn't, but he was seeing them. Everyday talk, routine interactions is the 4th theme, and that is just highlighting how important it is to read, the bedtime stories to your loved ones, to try to eat family meals together if you can, to say, a lot of families do like the high-low moments. I had one father who was dying, and he wanted to know how his daughter was doing in school and how, did she win the spelling bee. And so he was trying to make sure that he was still active in her life until the moment he died. And they were trying, as one woman said, we're not sitting around with a crying towel waiting for him to die. We are living with him every day. And that's what the everyday talk, talking about the Bobcats winning in overtime and how exciting that was, or doing something that was comfortable for them every day. It's especially important for children because it's a scary time. It's a lot of chaos going on. And so the routine interactions are especially comforting and give some structure to children during the end of life. The 5th theme is closure of a difficult relationship. This conversation only occurs for those individuals who have had a challenging relationship with their loved ones all their life, right? They didn't get along with their father or their mother or their sibling, whoever it might be. And they were trying to figure out, one woman said, how do I clean up this mess so that I'm not left hanging and holding all this garbage that she was feeling? People who don't have this kind of relationships don't identify with this thing at all. They never talk about it. But if you've had a difficult relationship, this was the most important thing to them. And the last thing that I did not find in the original research, but we found in the survey research, is called instrumental death talk. All the research that's out there talks about how important it is for the dying to have like a living will, to say what they do or do not want done to them at the end of life. Do they want to be intubated or not intubated? Do they want extreme measures taken or not at all? And so it was out there. That research was out there. So we added some questions about it, and all the respondents who had lost a loved one said, oh yes, of course we talked about that. It wasn't as memorable to them, but it was important to them so that they could help their loved one have the best death that's possible, so that it was peaceful and that it was without pain, and so that it was as gentle as possible. Okay, so those are the 6 themes. So here are some specific examples. Shared messages of love include direct messages of I love you. They're often repeated numerous times during final conversations. Nonverbal is very, very important. And all kinds of affection, holding hands, stroking the face. When my mother was dying 23 years ago, she woke up out of a coma and looked straight at my father, and then she was gone. And I heard actually Nancy Reagan say that about Ronald Reagan also. So you hear a lot of stories about people, and they choose to die at the moment that they choose. I mean, the person who's dying often gets to choose unless it's a traumatic death. And he chose to die only with my father. She chose to die only with my father in the room. And she came back and looked at him one last time. Identity messages, they trigger an examination, a reevaluation, and a redefinition of who we are. Often the dying will compliment and boast the self-esteem of living, tell them how smart they are. I had one young man who was 19 who was dying, and he told his mother that she should go back to school for both of them since he wouldn't be able to go. She's the first person in her family to get a college degree. She, at the time, was in her 40s working as an administrative assistant at Texas State. And she went on and got her bachelor's degree in social work, and she did it for her son. The dying can also talk about give insights into who they, into who they think the living are. So in some instances, they can say, you know, you're not accepting yourself enough, or you're putting yourself down too much, or you're too concerned with others, what others think about you. And I want you to realize how beautiful you are. I want you to realize how smart you are. I want you. So sometimes it's a little kick in the butt, always done with love. And here's the thing, is that when someone we love is dying, if they're telling us these kind of messages, they become very important. One, because nobody thinks that your loved one's going to lie to them when they're about to die. And 2, that they've taken their energy and their final thoughts to share this important message to us. And so they take on a tremendous amount of being, and they have an impact for years and decades after our loved one has died. So again, the person who's dying, the terminally ill, will talk about their wives or their children's or their brothers or their friends' strengths, gifts, and talents that they see, and want them to recognize it. And they also may give suggestions about how the living can go on after the dying has. So I had a number of husbands tell their wives, and usually they were young, in their 40s, 30s, and late 30s, early 40s, that they should get married again, because they had a wonderful love relationship, and they would not want their loved one to be alone, you know, for decades to come. And any of the wives who received that message said that it was critical for them to receive that, to be able to move on. Spirituality and religious faith messages. So this is powerful, because I had 2 sisters who told me about an instance where their mother was in a coma, but then all of a sudden she started greeting people and saying hello to all these people. And then at one point she put her hands out as if she was going to receive the body of Christ, and then she took it and ate it, and said, you know, amen. And these women, it was really important to them, because they were not, they were very Christian, and they were not 100% sure how strong their mother's faith was. And so they gave them tremendous comfort that she was having this moment. And she was enacting the body of Christ, receiving the body of Christ. So that was important to them. The living often came away with the validation of their beliefs, or an affirmation of their beliefs, a restoration of their dormant belief system, or acknowledgement of a perceptual shift in their beliefs. So I had one older man, he was in his 70s, and he was always like a big member of the church, church council. So he was very religious, but his mother told him a story that was very spiritual, and it shifted for him. He became more spiritual, not just religious, but he also believed in a greater spirituality than he had before. I had one young woman who talked about, she was raised Catholic, but had kind of moved away from it. And she had an experience with her grandparents that made her choose to go back to a religious system. I don't remember if she went back to being a Catholic, but she finally started becoming more active in her own faith and belief system and religion. Everyday talk and routine interactions. So a lot of these stories created avenues for humor and light talk. So about, your favorite football team or your favorite movies, a lot of, if it was my family right now, we'd be talking about the Marvel movies. We love Marvel movies. So we would have probably watched them together and then share that moment of memory again, and then talk about it. When you do this, you're spending time with the other person, and time alone says that you're important to me, and that I'm going to give you as much time as I possibly can give you. And hopefully there are gatekeepers around, so hopefully the gatekeepers let you in, and that the dying wants visitors. Sometimes they don't. So we have to be, we have to honor the dying person's wishes. But it demonstrates a willingness and genuine desire to talk, and it confirms that we want to be in their life as much as possible until the moment they die. We're not waiting around for them to die. We are living with them. We are sharing our lives with them. And that's what you do. I mean, think about it in your everyday life. If you have a significant other, you kiss them hello and goodbye. You kiss them good morning and good night. You share a meal together and you talk about your day. You sit down and watch your favorite team play or your favorite movies, or you binge watch Netflix. Believe it or not, that also is important at the end of life. What we're doing every day in our relationships is what we really also want to be doing at the end of life. And these themes remind me all the time how important communication is in the family and in our relationships, to maintain them, to manage them, and to enhance them. And it's the simple things. My dad used to talk about how he just missed having my mom, flip him on Sundays the perfect sunny side up eggs and toast, or walking by and seeing her read her book. And he said it was, or being able to go tell her something that happened to him that day. And he said it was those tiny moments that he didn't think about beforehand that he missed so much when she died. And then so closure of a difficult relationship. Now understand, I only talked to the people who are living. So I'm sure there are many instances where the person who's dying also take on the role of the peacemaker or healer. Those stories just weren't shared with me. So the living found a way to reconcile with as much as they can with the person who is dying without threatening their face or cause them any additional grief or pain. So keep in mind that when your loved one is dying, they are physically and mentally shrinking. And so kicking somebody when they are down and in pain doesn't make you feel better. Even though you may think, oh, it's my chance to, get back at somebody who's hurting. It doesn't make you feel better. And they realize that. And you also can't just walk into a room and say, well, I forgive you, because maybe this person doesn't understand how much they hurt you, and they don't understand why you're trying to say, I forgive you. It may make them defensive and could cause a very destructive conversation. So all the people I talked with about this topic entered it gently, and they were trying to make sense of why their relationship was the way it was. And many of them said they realized that it wasn't about them anymore. That how they were treated was not because of them. It was the limitation of the person who was their mother or their father. Usually was a conversation about their mother or father, and that they had done the best that they could. In one instance, this woman said that her mother was just very quiet and had a lot of silence, and she thought that the silence was pointed at her, when she instead someone was just an introvert and was silent with a lot of people and would only talk when there was something that she thought she could share. Another instance, a mother was cruel in many ways. But she was the first person to go bake a cake or a casserole for somebody in the church who was sick or dying and volunteered a lot of time. So she was better at showing grace and comfort to strangers in this daughter's eyes. And at the end of her life, she realized again, it was her mother's flaw. It was not about her anymore. And so she could let go of some of that pain. And she said it started her healing. And she had more healing to do after her mother had died. But she said if she had hung on to all the anger she felt, she would never have been able to love anybody. Because she was just she was consumed by anger. And she had let go a lot of it. And it was because of this difficult relationship talk. In some instances, it's just once. In other instances, it's multiple times. In one instance, a young man came to talk to me, and his mother was an alcoholic. In the years when she was not an alcoholic, he said she was a very loving mother, but he had a lot of trauma in his life. And when he would try to have a final conversation with her, he didn't know that's what he was having, but he was. She would say, "Oh, you think you're better than me? You know, you're just gonna be just like me." Where his healing, difficult relationship talk came was when she was actually kind of in a coma, semi-coma, and he would say things like, "I know you did the best you could," and all of a sudden she would squeeze his hand. He would say, "I love you," squeeze his hand, but she wasn't verbally strong enough to shut him down, which is what had stopped many, many other conversations. And that woman was filled with a lot of fear, and she had had a lot of hardship and difficult circumstances in her life. And so he started to recognize that's what it was about. And he told me it made a huge difference in his life to have those conversations. It gave them peace and closure, which was enhanced their own welfare in the long term. By the way, it's a warning. Not everyone who has a poor relationship with someone can have a positive result. So you need to decide if you need to keep the boundary up and not participate in one because it's only going to be destructive for you, or maybe participate in a final conversation but not bring up the topic. Only you know what's right for you. You need to trust your intuition, because I guarantee you there are some negative final conversations that people have had. They just didn't tell me about them, because if you have that kind of experience at the end of life, why would you volunteer to tell a stranger that story? So I'm sure that they are there. I just wasn't shared. The stories weren't shared with me. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. Instrumental death talk, again, I told you that's the last thing that I found. And it is a living will. It is wishes on how they want their medical needs met and dealt with at the end of life. It's can be tasks that they think has to get done. Following the death, when my father-in-law was dying, he had left my mother-in-law lists of things and account numbers and duties that he had always done, so she would know how to do it. And he made sure he told her where those lists were. And in some instances, he talked to her about it before he died. And then also these wishes can also include wishes for memorial or funeral services. So my mother was cremated, and we lived in Arizona all my life, but my mother and father were from Connecticut, and she wanted her ashes, she wanted to be cremated, and she wanted her ashes to be put in the ocean on this place called Long Island Sound. And so we did. And she also, my family were Catholic. She did not want an open casket. She said, "I will come back and haunt you." And we would laugh because the way she said it, she was passionate about it. And so we try to honor her wishes. And then when my father just died, we just took his ashes to be with my mother in Connecticut on Long Island Sound. And those, believe it or not, can be very happy conversations. They're usually not maudlin. In fact, my father-in-law wrote his entire, what do you call it? We put in the newspaper.
Obituary.
Thank you. Yes, thank you so much. He wrote his entire obituary, and it was very long. And when my mother-in-law found out how much it was going to cost, she laughed and said he would be horrified. It's so much more than it used to be. And so they edited it down a little bit until my mother-in-law was more comfortable with it not being $1,000. My father-in-law had accomplished a lot. He had written 7 books. He was quite a historian. Thank you, Alma, for helping me.
No problem.
Okay. So a lot of that research, especially the first 5 things, I discovered by about 2007. And then I went on and did research with children, and my children's research showed that all those themes, except for the difficult relationship talk, were present for children and adolescents. They had different order, like everyday talk and routine interactions was the most important theme for children, and then identity, and then love. And I was at first confused why love for children wasn't the most important thing. And many of the little ones remind me that because I was being silly, they said, because mommy and daddy always said I love you no matter what. So why was that? In their mind, it wasn't a final conversation. It was just everyday talk to them. So that made me smile. Out of the mouths of babes. So these children, in addition to telling me, about the themes and telling me their stories and what they look like, by the way, little ones give very brief stories as opposed to adults, because they don't have the cognitive ability. So I thought I would be writing a second book about children, but their stories there was not enough depth there for a book. The teenagers actually revealed a lot of interesting things. And so here is some advice from the children and adolescents. And honestly, most of this is probably from the adolescents. So I interviewed children from 5 to 17. So here are first advice that children have for other children and adolescents who are going to lose something. So their mother or father or brother or sister or a beloved grandparent, somebody is dying. First, they're telling the children, well, spend as much time as you're comfortable with, and do the everyday stuff, play the chess or checkers or whatever you play with them, or dominoes. Tell them you love them, share messages that are important to you. They also go on and say, but you can't make children go spend time with them. Children have to want to, and they have to be invited in and let them have the choice. And they also want children to stop the positivity bias. So they realize that that's tough. And what they mean by that is the teenagers are saying, it's easy for me to say, oh, you're gonna be fine, you're gonna be fine. And there's usually adults who are telling them everything's gonna be fine, and they're not really being honest with them. But when they realize, which is often too late, that they missed all this time and opportunity to have conversations, then they feel like they've been robbed. So they have to at least have the opportunity to talk with them, and they have to be allowed to see the truth of it, and not always put the illness as they're a fighter, they're going to beat this. You got to be honest, especially if it looks like they're not going to. And they also talk about how important external support networks are. So if your mother's dying, your father may not be the person who can help you the most because they're too torn up themselves. So have a beloved aunt or uncle who or a coach, or a cheerleading mom, or somebody else who's very important in their life, to also be there to help them, to talk with them, because the people who we think might be there to support us may be so deep in their own grief that they're not capable of having the conversations or being able to take the time to sit with them and be quiet and let the children ask them the questions. So it's important to realize who is in the kids network, who is the best person for this role. It's not taking away the mother or father's role or the brother or whoever's role it is. It's adding another person in case those people are not available. And then these adolescents also had advice for the dying themselves, and what they say. First, they also tell them, spend as much time as you can with your children or adolescents. Listen to their stories. Tell them how important they are to them and how much they love them, and that they'll always be there for them, and people who said that part really probably had a spiritual belief and truly did believe that they were going to be able to look in on their loved ones, and that the memories that are created don't die, and the love you feel in your heart doesn't die. And so they're telling the dying to make sure that we communicate this to the little ones and to the adolescents. They also were very adamant that we need to be more open and honest with our children and adolescents, that they're not stupid. They can see the changes in the health behavior. They can see that this person isn't getting off the couch, or isn't getting out of the bedroom, or is now on oxygen, or is eating very little. So they can see these things. And so if you're not telling them verbally that this adult is very sick and may die, then they're going to guess, they're going to fear the worst and be angry that they don't know what's going on. So that they're just saying, be as open, honest. Be careful. I mean, like, I'm not talking about being, like a 3-year-old can only take so much information in. The 3-year-old probably just needs to get the hug and then let them go play and have somebody take care of them. As they get older, 5 to 10, they have some idea. You can be honest, but really you can ask them questions. What do you see and what do you want to know? And let them tell you what they're seeing, and they can tell you what they're capable of understanding, without you dumping everything on them. So that is a good way to start it, is ask them questions about their fears or their thoughts or what they think is going on, and then address it from there. They also said that so many adults, and the dying especially, but so many, even the adults who are the spouses of the person who's dying, try to hide their real emotions because they're trying to be strong, for the dying. They're trying to be strong for themselves. They're trying to be strong for the children. But if you don't share your real emotions, then the children are not given permission to share their emotions. They think that they have to be tough. Do you know how many young men, adolescents, told me that when their father died, they were told, you're the head of the household now, even if they were 10 years old or 12 years old. And so I remember talking to some adults who lost their loved one when they were children. They said, that's too much to put on a 10-year-old. Don't do that. And then there was no crying. And so he was told in his mind, even though nobody said these words, he was told, big boys don't cry. I'm the man of the house. I'm not allowed to cry, even though my father just died. That's too much to put on a child and an adolescent. And it's okay for, for you to be angry that you're dying, because my mom she was angry. She was died at 67. And so it let us be angry at times, or sad. If she was sad, I was given permission to cry and also be sad too. So it's just something to think about. And answer the questions honestly, and also try to avoid words like "mommy went to sleep," right? Because if you go to sleep, then you're going to wake up. And if you're not going to wake up, then when I go to sleep, am I not going to wake up? So you need to use real words that they understand, that what death is and that it's permanent. But again, it depends on the age of the child. For a 6-year-old, say that mommy's died, and if you have a belief in afterlife, say she went to heaven or whatever it might, but you're going to have to come back and talk to them later on, because they may think, well, does she just go visit heaven and she's going to come back? So you may have to talk about this, and you will have to talk about it more once. The death is final. The conversations about the death and the dying are not final. So you need to take the time when the children bring it up, and don't shut them down, and encourage the conversations. Also, by the way, if you eventually get remarried, please, I have a colleague who did the study when her mother got remarried. They took away every picture of her father. She was never allowed to talk about her father. She's not allowed to celebrate her father's birthday or remember his death on anniversary, because it would be dishonorable and make her new stepfather uncomfortable. She had a horrible relationship with her stepfather because of this. And she was angry with her mother because she felt like she had lost her father all over again. It's okay if your child has a picture. In fact, they should have a picture of their mother or father who has died. And there's more love instead of less. So if you let them talk about their family, their father or their mother or brother, whoever died, that means that the new stepfather or the new stepmother who's coming in, they're recognizing the importance of that relationship, and it helps create a stronger relationship between you and them, because it is honoring those children, and it's honoring their memory of their father or mother. So more conversation, not less, is what they were suggesting. Thoughts or questions? Okay. One of the studies I did looked at what are the challenges of final conversations. First of all, people are always faced with this pressure of running out of time. What am I supposed to say? How much time do I have? Like the first question we ask doctors is, how much time do I have? They don't like to give a time. They would try to give a range because it's pushed upon them. And there are many people where they're saying, well, we think you'll die within 6 months, and they might die within 6 weeks. Or they're told 6 months and they're still alive a year and a half later. But the time, this idea of chronemics of time, is just there all the time. And it just feels like pressure. I like to call it terminal time. And I actually think that it was freeing for me, at least, because when my mother died, I was here teaching at Texas State. I had a baby, and I was teaching full time, and she lived in Arizona. And so most years I would see my mother 2 weeks, maybe a week at Christmas, maybe a week in summer, maybe 2 weeks in the summer. When my mother died, I spent 9 weeks out of the last 4 months with her. A lot of it was over the summertime, so I could bring my baby with me, and I wasn't teaching for half the summer, so I went there and helped take care of her, and I went back and forth a number of times. What a gift to have that much time with her. I will never forget that time. There's also these dialectical tensions. So in the family, usually there's people who accept the death or the incoming, the about to be, the impending death, and there are people in the family who are denying it. And so that creates this tension of, am I allowed to talk about it with the person who's dying or not? I had one adult young woman tell me that her grandmother, who helped raise her, was dying, and her parents forbid her from talking to her grandmother about the death and dying because they didn't want to upset the grandmother. She felt robbed because she couldn't talk to the grandmother and tell her how much she had meant to her in her mind, because they couldn't talk about her death. So understand that's a challenge when you have people in the family who are on different parts of the spectrum. And for some individuals, they may have moments where they are in denial, and then eventually they change over to acceptance. So even within individuals, we might see this. So the openness and closedness dialectical tension is, and challenges talking about the death is, how much can we self-disclose, and how much do we have to keep private about our own fears, about my own doubts, or anything, because it's not just about the death, it's also about, when you die, here's what I'm afraid of, or here's what's going to go on, but I don't want to burden you with that, so I'm going to keep all of these things that, if I had realized I could be open with you, you might help me process it. You might help me see my way forward. So a lot of people say, I just don't, I'm going to be closed off to it. And even when the dying tries to bring up that their time is limited, they say, oh, don't be silly, Grandpa. You know, you're going to have lots of time. And hey, did you see that, Bobcat win? Or did you see that, that so-and-so won in the election, they changed the topic to something that they think is not as personal. Again, that shuts down the final conversations, and you won't get as much out of this time as you possibly can. I highly encourage you to be open, not come dump all your thoughts on this person who's dying, not burden them, but just sit with them and see what conversations they start, and don't shut them down, and try to be open to it and respond to them. And then you can start, if you have something you want to bring in, you can bring up the topic and see if they run with it, or if they don't want to have that conversation. You can't force a conversation on someone. This is especially true about if you're very religious and you have a strong faith and you want to find out if this person has accepted, Jesus Christ. You can't preach to them. You need to let them say, I want to have this conversation or not. So you need to walk gently into it, but open up the possibility of this conversation, if that makes sense. Then also, I had a number of people say that one of the challenges was they weren't sure whether or not they could express their emotion. And if they could, what were they allowed? Were they allowed to laugh, or is that disrespectful because this person's dying? Are they allowed to cry in front of the person who's dying or not? Are they allowed to show their anger about whatever the circumstances or something that's happened in their past or not? Am I supposed to conceal all of this emotion? And again, I think that adults especially lead this to show our children and adolescents what they're allowed to show and express. And I also think that we need to be careful about shutting down the person who is dying so that they're allowed to reveal their emotions also. Also, the conversations that you have with your siblings or your friends, try to express your emotions with them if you cannot express it with the person who is dying. But I will tell you that the time in the conversations you have, the best ones are going to happen early on, because as you get closer to the moment of death, their body shuts down and they're not capable of having long verbal conversations. And sometimes the final conversation, if you haven't had one, it's going to be purely nonverbal. It's going to be you holding their hand and maybe them squeezing it back. So the more frequent your conversations are, the more that you have, and the earlier you start them, the more fulfilling your final conversations will be. And they will help you deal with your grief. It will help you, you will still feel grief. When your loved one dies, you're still going to feel grief, but it may not be to the depth of sorrow that you might have been. When my mother died, I didn't think I'd be able to breathe. And yet I could. I was sad. I was very sad and I cried, but it didn't last as long. And I could talk about it in ways I didn't think was possible. And it's because of my final conversations I had with them. It was because of the time I had with my mother that was precious. It was the memories I have from those conversations that I remember today. It's almost 23 years ago. Thoughts, questions? Okay. There are also, in some of our studies, we found out that there are certain topics that tend to be avoided at the end of life between family members. One are often people will not talk about the negative relationship characteristics that they have. You were selfish, or you were mean to me, or you never said I love you. Many people said that they did not clear the air. They did not seek forgiveness or demand forgiveness from the other person because they thought it was too difficult of a conversation. So even though difficult relationship talk is important, and those who did participate in them, that I found out in the earlier interviews, there are many people who fill out the survey who said, I did not talk to them about these topics, and here's why. Some people also avoid talking about their own spiritual religious beliefs or the belief in an afterlife because they may have thought that their loved one had a different religious view at the end of life, or maybe they did not have any belief and you do, or vice versa. And they did not want to create sticky conversations. They did not want challenging or difficult conversations. So they kept it light and avoided talking about their belief system. But usually they go, but I wish I had known. I wish I knew if my mom or dad had this belief in an afterlife. I wish I knew whatever it was that they were concerned about. Now, many people also avoid talking about their post-death arrangements, the funeral, or asking for any specific advice, because they thought by doing that, they were giving up hope and acknowledging that the person was going to die, as if the person who's dying doesn't realize that they're dying. But people who are dying know that they're dying. But then the person would die and they'd have fights in the family about, well, let's do this. No, mom would not have wanted that. Well, how do you know? Like, if my mom had not told us, I do not want a wake. I do not want the rosary said, I do not want an open casket. I want just a simple memorial service. There would have been fights in my family because my father, even after she said that, wanted to have the open casket, even though we were going to have her cremated, wanted to have the full service. And we just told my dad, but she said she didn't want it. And if she hadn't said that, I guarantee there would have been more fights, which creates more problems. Funerals and weddings. Think about how many fights you have in your family during these big family events because people have differences of opinion. If you ask beforehand, then you can cut down that possibility. And then also, they didn't ask about personal information, someone's sexuality or what the nature of relationships were, their attitudes about certain things. A lot of this came in from people who had hidden their gender orientation or their sexual preferences or orientation, or something that they thought was very private. In some instances, it was their political opinions. But I think a lot of the stories that were shaped around the personal information were that, well, my mother never knew I was gay. Well, my mother knew that I was transgender, or my father, whoever it was that was important to them. And they said, but that makes me sad because that means that they didn't really know me. So, thoughts? Questions? Okay.
No questions, but I do have a comment because I think it's in my family, we're just very open about talking about funeral. I mean, it's a fact of life. We're all gonna die. So that just kind of, my sister literally has everything, even the program for her service we just fill in the date, which is crazy. But so I just think it's odd
It's a
when I
gift.
come around people that
Oh,
have never even talked about it.
it's a gift. Can I tell you how rare your family is? Honestly, I mean,
Really.
I've been saying this for 20 years, and I've had over the years, so many people are just shocked that they should have done this. I'm going,
Yeah,
we
no.
we talk about it too, but I have sisters who are nurses, and my mother was a nurse. My father was a police officer, so he saw a lot of death. And two of my brothers were in the fire department, so death was always kind of a part of our conversations. So we had these conversations. It is forbidden in so many cultures or just certain families. So,
Yeah.
oh, what a gift!
Well, thank you.
Smart too. Okay. So why are topics avoid the end of life? Well, they want to protect the relationship during the whole end of life journey. They want to protect their own self-presentation. They're protecting their own face. They're protecting their own image in the eyes of the person who's dying. Or sometimes they avoid topic because the person who they finally come to have a conversation with, but the condition of the dying, they can't talk anymore, right? They're too exhausted or they're in too much pain. Because if someone's in a lot of pain, and I mean, hospice, if they're in hospice, isn't doing their job, or if they're not in hospice, then their doctors are afraid to give them too much medicine because they're afraid to become addicted, which is ridiculous. This person's dying. But if they're in pain or they're in a coma, you can't talk about things, right? It's too late. And then for some people, they just think it's inappropriate. Some of the topics they want to bring up. I personally don't think any topic's inappropriate. If it's important to you, you might be surprised that it's important to your loved one who's dying because they want to know you. They want to, but that's also a perfect world. I mean, you know your family better than I do. And so maybe in some instances, you're correct in not sharing that story. It's possible. So I've also done some recent studies where I've looked at final conversations in coping and also personal growth. And I discovered is that individuals who had final conversations, some of the things that they said they found out helped them cope is realizing that their loved one had a belief in an afterlife, and they did too. About 65% of all Americans have some sort of belief in an afterlife, have some sort of spiritual or religious belief system. And for those individuals, that is powerful. It helps them cope better. If you do not have a belief in the afterlife or you do not believe in God, then this would not be relevant. This one, just cross it out. It won't help you cope at all because you won't believe it, and neither will they. I read the story once about this guy who is an atheist, and he said, and he's like the most famous atheist or something, and he was dying. He said, let me tell you right now, I don't want your prayers. I don't believe in the power of prayer. Give them to people who do believe in them. He said, he had very specific instructions, put him in the ground and let him become worm food. I mean, he was just blatant about it. So his family members would not cope because of that belief in the afterlife, right? If they shared his belief system. They also said that final conversations happened because their loved one, seeing that they accepted their impending death, that they were prepared, helped them have closure and helped them accept the impending death. I remember once crying and my mom asked me what was wrong. I said, well, Mom, I'm not ready for you to die. You've only met one of my children. I hope to have a second. And you're too young. And she said to me, I've seen all my children raised. I've seen most of my grandchildren born. She did have a belief in afterlife, and I had asked her to go on her deathbed. I asked her to go find my daughter Megan and to bring her to me. And I now have a 21-year-old daughter named Megan who came 14 months after my mom died. And if we see that they accept their death, and we all have said what we need to say, there is a sense of closure that helps us cope. Reminiscing about the relationship. And so sometimes it's reminiscing about the events that happened during those final months or weeks. And sometimes it's just about the magnitude of the relationship and what this person has done for you, and we often have those conversations in final conversations, and it helps us remember them and it helps us cement them as being important. And then these stories were shared with me decades after their loved one had died. In some instances, it was just years, but in some, there were decades, and they just talked about the power of these final conversations and reminiscing. And I even had a number of people who told me that in talking with me about their stories or filling out this survey that we sent out to hundreds of people, they said, they came back and thanked me. I said, I had thought about that final conversation. I'd forgotten about it. And now I remembered it, and it's powerful. And I've been on a high all day after talking with you or completing the survey, or it made me pick up the phone and talk to my sister about this, or finally share the story that I never shared. So there is something about this act of communication, about these final moments, these final conversations, these memorable messages that we carry with us, and that helps us cope, and helps us come out of that moment when we're just on the ground and sad because we've lost this loved one. And then there's a memory that pops in and helps us cope. Many of the dying gave guidance to people on how to move on, whether it was to accept love again, or it was one father wrote a book, and each kid, 9 children, it was a blended family, and he wrote a personal letter to each child. He also recorded them a message, and then in the book it was all the messages he would tell the children, like when you fall in love, how do you know it's real love, and how do you know it's time to get married? What about sex? What about the use of alcohol and drugs? What about prayer in their families? What's important? What did it mean to be, a successful career person? I mean, he had written all these chapters. So for these children, that book was priceless. Some of the teenagers didn't appreciate the book at that moment, but they will. And they said, I know it was a little raw to them, but they appreciated it. And then the last thing about being a part of final conversations is you see them suffering and in pain. And so you realize that at the end, you're ready to let them go, because they're ready to let go, and they won't be suffering anymore. You won't be begging them to, have that sip of that strawberry milkshake that they loved, or to have a bite to eat, or, you don't have to give them that morphine shot to keep them out of pain. And so, but if you don't see any of that, it's really difficult to cope with it. Does that help? Okay. Final conversations also is related to personal growth. So personal growth refers to individuals making sense of their experiences that results in a newfound meaning and leads to changes in life that are attributed to challenging life experiences. Well, losing someone you love and participating in final conversations are challenging life experiences. And our participants said that the more often they engaged in final conversations with the dying, the more they felt they had the opportunity to experience personal growth after the death. And so this is not something they realize is happening in the final conversations. This is upon reflection back on the conversations, and they realize, they really believed in my ability to make arguments. That's why I went to law school. They really believed that I was a great cook and I should go become a chef. They always knew I'd be a great mom. And so I'm ready to be a mom, and they showed me how to be a mom, and they gave me advice on how to, be a good mom. But to have those conversations are priceless. And we also know that the terminally ill loved ones are necessary to help individuals get to the point of acceptance. It's because accepting that someone has died is an integral cognitive step to post-death outcomes. And if you don't see that someone has died, if you don't realize what a gift it is to have this person who you love help you get to the point where you can accept it, and help you realize that you can grow from this experience, and that you have so much more in life to do and to accomplish. If you're trying to do it all by yourself, it's almost impossible to have any personal growth from just the death, right? It's the absence of all that leaves a void. That's why when there's a sudden death, you don't know what to do with it. So I realized a long time ago that my mother was precious and priceless. What a treasure to be able to talk with my mother about my fears and my love for her, and what I hope to accomplish, and what kind of mom I wanted to be. And she helped me start processing my grief. She helped me grow, but I didn't realize it until months, years, even today. I realize it more and more when I recall back to a certain conversation, those kinds of things. So messages of identity. So dealing with your self-esteem and who you are, your strengths, your weaknesses, was highly related to personal growth, because it prepared them for the emotional journey after the death. They're reminded by the dying of their strengths, their positive qualities, their capabilities, and they could hang on to something tangible, some words that their loved one had given them, and gave them the courage to register for school and go to school, even if no one in your family had ever done it and you're in your 40s. It gave you the courage to pursue this dream, even though maybe people who are still alive think you should be doing something more practical, but this loved one said, follow your dreams. So it helped them tremendously. We also know that, Boo, no, I know it's here, Boo, Boo, come here, come here, come here, come here, sorry. She thinks she's tough, she's not. She knows someone's in the house and I know who's there, so. The acronym Instrumental Death Messages enables people to come to terms with the impending death, because their loved one had openly discussed the dying process, and they also talked about what came after death. And so that was freeing. If you have trouble accepting the death, you kind of get stuck and you aren't looking ahead, you keep looking back. And for personal growth, we need to continue walking ahead, right? And looking ahead. Difficult relationship messages. And again, not everybody can have these conversations, but it did allow those who did to clear the air and to move forward. We know that individuals who had final conversations about spiritual religious messages, it helped them make sense of the death process, and they had a common hope for an afterlife where they would meet up again. And then also the love messages, they're always important. They're powerful memories. And it also encouraged a positive, loving climate. So that if I feel safe and loved, then I have a better chance to take a chance and for personal growth. And love always helps do that. And if we can have these, if we can understand how important loving messages are, not just with the person who's dying, but with our own loved ones, with our people we live with. And if we feel safe and secure and loved, then we're more willing to take a chance and to grow and to go try something we've never tried before, to push ourselves harder to do something, because we already know we can fall back on this love that we have experienced from our dying loved one or from those we're with right now. Thank you, Leah. I just saw your chat. So why is communication useful? It helps us overcome our fears about final conversations about death. I'm not afraid of dying anymore. I shouldn't be after 20 years of research. Do I want to die tomorrow? No. But I know that when it eventually is on my doorstep, or I see it, a mile down the road, I will not have at least the fears I think other people who can't have this conversation. I think Alma will be the same way, because she has a family where they are allowed to talk about death and dying and wishes, and that that is embracing. It's embracing the circle of life.
Yeah.
Right. So we need to, and also Final Conversations. One reason I wrote, I co-wrote my book, Final Conversations, Helping the Living and the Dying Talk to Each Other. This is the book, by the way. I don't know if you can see it. Let me see if I put it up. There. But this came out in 2007, because it gave examples. There's so many examples in the book that act as role models. Like, we all have to practice how to interview. We all have to practice how to give a public speech. We have to practice, even if you're a best man or a maid of honor at a wedding, you have to learn how to give a speech. You practice it. Well, we don't practice final conversations because they're not real. You can't practice it with pretend. You pretend I'm dying, I'm gonna have a final conversation with you. That's not, no, it doesn't work that way. But if we can see examples, and they're done in private, which they should be done in private because it's a private thing. But in the book, we give lots of examples so that it helps people realize that they can do it. And I've had some instances of people who read the book and said, wow, I did do it. I didn't think it was a final conversation, but now I'm seeing what I can learn from it, and thank you. My co-author and I are currently working on updating the book with all this new information that we have. We're gonna have 5 new chapters, and we're hoping to be done with it by the end of summer, this summer, 2022. So maybe it'll come out in the end of 2022, but we'll find out. But we know we have a contract with our publisher, who is not the first publisher because she sold her company. It's with whoever she sold the company to, so Quick Publishing. So, and oh, look at that, it's 1:30. I did it. Does anyone have any questions for me? I can't see any faces. You all have the screen off, but if anybody has any questions or comments. Okay. Also, if you want to send me an email, my email is mk09@texasstate.edu, and I'll be happy to answer your individual questions. Thank you all for coming very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.